I've just warmed up. Okay, so we've looked at all this, biomarkers here, and what we've decided here is that the blastocyst is not going to be quiet. It rolls around everywhere. So we find that the apposition, a stable adhesion, and invasion has to take place, and so till that happens, so a successful invasion means a successful implantation. So if you look at the HOXA10 and the cathepsin expressions in endometrium of women with recurrent implantation failure and recurrent miscarriage, this suggests that a potential role of these molecules are required for successful implantation. So, what would our therapeutic approach be in this case? Because we've been asked to cover the recent advances. One would be, can we improve the gamete and embryo quality? Optimizing the embryo transfer, making it atraumatic, enhancing their endometrial receptivity, which Manish has very well spoken about, and also treatment of the other multifactorial problems that may exist in the non-implantation. So, if you look at the methods to improve the sperm morphology, um, look at this. Is this one? Can you bring it on back, please? The IMSI, that is looking at the sperm, the rationale would be morphologically selected sperms may improve the outcome, but the evidence is inconclusive. Some benefit in RIF couples with male factor, but further trials need to be done. Rationale of giving sperm DNA damage is lower, like when you do testicular sperm retrieval, is still experimental. So, what about MAX? Does that help you? Use of magnetic activated microbeads to separate apoptotic sperms from the good sperms. That means select sperms at a molecular level. Results yet to be validated using large, well defined trials. What about the laboratory innovations to improve embryo selection? Now we've got a whole lot of instruments over here, and this is, of course, we've got the time lapse embryoscope there. We've also got the other different types of incubators here, different types of time lapse machines that have come in. Of course, it does tell you the rate of division, it helps you for embryo selection from a morphokinetic approach. But of course, is that the only way to look at it? No, I think we've got many more ways to look at it. What does the Cochrane say about the time lapse systems for embryo incubation and embryo assessment for couples undergoing in vitro fertilization and cytoplasmic sperm injection? There is insufficient good quality evidence of differences in live birth or ongoing pregnancy rate, miscarriage, and stillbirth, or clinical pregnancy rate to choose between time lapse with or without embryo selection software and conventional incubation. So, as the evidence is of low or very low quality, our findings should be interpreted with caution. Of course, if you've got the machine, then you've got the machine, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone must buy this machine. Now, look at the pre implantation genetic screening and value in the current era. Earlier, we used to call this as pre implantation genetic screening or pre implantation diagnosis. But now, with reproductive therapy, we have the PGTA, which is for aneuploidy, PGTM for monogenic diseases, and PGTSR for structural rearrangements. So if you look at the PGTA, that is the next generation sequencing technique, you will see the non-invasive embryonic DNA sampling, that is from the blastocyst culture conditioned medium or the blastocele fluid. Then you have the whole genome amplification, a trophectodome biopsy, an NGS, next generation sequencing, a data analysis and interpretation, and giving you the final results. So, what happens finally is you're looking at embryo selection. Is it an aneuploid embryo or a chromosomal aberration? So, if it is an aneuploid embryo or a chromosomal aberration, you discard the embryo. What happens if it becomes a mosaic? You can consider to transfer, because all mosaics need not remain mosaics because of the active multiplication of this embryo, and there is a writing process as well. So these embryos need not necessarily be abnormal, but it has to be with caution. When they are euploid embryos, then you can select to transfer. So if you looked at the simultaneous assessment of aneuploidy, translocations, and single gene disorders, low levels of mosaicism of less than 25%, then in these sort of situations, one can look at the next gen sequencing. So whether you put the embryo in or out, the question will be dependent upon how normal is that normal embryo. Will it really work? Is it a help or a hype? Is it a therapeutic illusion? What does the STAR trial tell us? Single embryo transfer. A randomized controlled trial comparing pregnancy rates following very sequence, that is PGS, versus standard morphology for elective single embryo transfer, suggests in this particular thing that the inclusion criteria was females aged 25 to 40 years, less than 2 prior failed IVF cycles, less than 1 prior miscarriage, and not a known carrier or of a single gene disorder or a chromosomal abnormality. The others would, of course, be the exclusion criteria. The key differentiators of this trial: globally, 4 countries were selected, multi-center trial, 34 clinical sites, and 9 genetic laboratories were included. One of the largest RCTs undertaken to date in this field of assisted reproduction, with over 650 subjects randomized. So it started with the visit 1, where the screening is done, then the oocyte retrieval, then day 0 of the fertilization, day 5 to 6 is the embryo check, and at that stage, they were randomized into Group A and Group B. So in Group A, the very sequence PGS was done, and in Group B, a morphological assessment was done, and then after that, these embryos were vitrified. On the second visit, the single embryo transfer was done. Now, the primary outcome of a 20-week ongoing pregnancy was the endpoint. So, when we looked at this, the primary outcome of this study at the rate of 20, at the thing of 20 weeks gestation, which was not significantly different overall between the 2 study arms. Mind you, these are people who don't have any genetic abnormalities. The subgroup analysis revealed that the 20-week ongoing pregnancy rate was significantly increased by the PGS in women aged 35 to 40 years, but not in women aged 25 to 34 years. And all women with an ongoing pregnancy at 20 weeks gestation went on to have a live birth. Aneuploidy testing. The large RCT finds no improvement in pregnancy rates from PGTA. The recently published STAR trial with more than 600 subjects fails to find any overall outcome benefit from the PGTA with the next gen sequencing in good prognosis patients. The mantra here is good prognosis patients. So therefore, you don't do PGT for one and all. The current pitfalls in the PGT. Mosaicism of 15 to about 32% is something, this is a gray zone. Biopsy not exactly representative of the embryoploidy status, like false negatives and false positives, and additional factors determining the reproductive potential. The non-invasive chromosomal analysis of the embryos at the oocyte level, ICSI level, day 5-6 blastocysts, the culture medium collection, the mixed sample preparation, next generation sequencing, and result reporting. So the advantage of the non-invasive chromosomal testing analysis is less embryo manipulation, avoids disruptive embryo biopsies, which have been recently shown to increase the risks of preeclampsia and placental problems in pregnancy. So we need to understand that these are important. Can you do the non-invasive chromosomal analysis of the embryo? The status of the pre-implantation genetic testing of and embryo selection shows great improvements in non-invasive PGT using spent blastocyst culture media have been noted. A concordance rate of about 80 to 95% with trophectoderm biopsy has been realized. Now look at the use of poloscope. This is of course to identify the spindle so that when an ICSI is done, the spindle is not harmed. This gives a birefringence and you're able to identify the spindle, so you go at right angles to the spindle and therefore the spindle is not harmed. So therefore the ICSI rate in terms of fertilization would be much higher. Non-invasive biochemical markers. Of course, this was metabolomics, and you have a glucose uptake, you have a lactate production, ammonia, amino acids, and whatnot. So a drop of almost 5 to about 50 microliters of defined culture medium is used over here. And of course, you look at even the semi-non-invasive like the blastocele fluid sampling or a fluorescence imaging microscopy or a hyperspectral analysis. And this is what is called as the metabolomics spectroscopy, the Raman NIR NMR effect. So this is something that was there for some time and has been taken out. Of course, the newer version is now currently available. Now, the other thing we did enjoy some amount of success was this embryo glue. This was the new boy on the market and adherence. Methods to improve embryo transfer. Zona pellucida, a co-culture. Let's see what happens in these cases. Assisted hatching was related to increased pregnancy rate and multiple pregnancy rates in women with recurrent implantation failure. Now, assisted hatching slightly improves the clinical pregnancy rates, particularly in poor prognosis patients, including those with RIF, poor quality embryo, and older women, that is 38 years and more. While routine practice, it is not supportive, and this is the ASRM guidelines 2011. What about sequential transfer? Well, it did take some this in trials before it was abandoned, and the sequential transfer. One is it overcomes the problem of embryo endometrial asynchronicity as a potential problem for implantation failure. A second insertion can cause trauma to the endometrium and release of inflammatory cytokines, possibility of infection as well. So, with conflicting evidences with regards to single embryo transfer, further trials are warranted. Look at the co-culture conditions. Co-culture conditions of embryos on different feeder cell layers implicated in improving the culture conditions, enhancing the growth and potential ability of the embryo to implant, and the evidence here is still lacking. The embryo glue, it's a hyaluronal rich medium resembling the uterine fluid. It is reported to facilitate rapid diffusion with viscous uterine fluid, provide nutritional support to the embryo transfer for implantation. It supports biochemical signaling during implantation. So, what is the evidence? It's a moderate quality evidence. Optimizing endometrial receptivity, my colleague Dr. Manish Pankar has spoken to you about it, and therefore I'm not going to be speaking about the ERA part of it, but looking at the endometrial microbiota, which is a new player in town, characterization of the microbiome in the reproductive tract. It's a molecular based technique, utilizes the 16S RNA. Hypervariable regions serve as unique identifiers of the genus. So, non-lactobacillus dominated microbiota correlated with adverse reproductive outcomes like failure of implantation in 60% versus 23% and miscarriage. So, non-lactobacillus species are anaerobes that release virulence, factors, and enzymes. That becomes toxic to the embryos, results in failed implantation. Emerging evidence on the use of vaginal probiotics restores the vaginal and endometrial biofilm and aids implantation. No consensus on optimal duration of therapy is yet noted. Now, role of GCSF in RIF, I will not talk more about it. I think my previous colleague has already spoken about it. But basically, to say that angiogenesis and immunomodulation will be the way that this would be active. The therapeutic, the conclusion here with the 10 RCTs and 1016 women shows that the GCSF administration has a beneficial role on the clinical outcome after embryo transfer by both routes of local infusion and systemic administration, especially for the cases with recurrent implantation failure. But further RCTs are needed to investigate the role of GCSF in thin endometrium. Intrauterine infusion of autologous platelet-rich plasma in women undergoing assisted reproduction, a systematic review and meta-analysis suggests significant increase in implantation rate and clinical pregnancy rate and improvement in endometrial thickness. However, further RCTs needed to evaluate the subpopulation. Effect of intrauterine perfusion of human chorionic gonadotropin before embryo transfer after two or more implantation failures, a systematic review, and meta-analysis. Intrauterine perfusion is effective in improving the clinical pregnancy rate and live birth rate in women with RIF, which may provide a potential therapeutic option. Although promising, further evidence from multicentric trials, RCTs, are needed to confirm this conclusion. So, role of vasodilators like aspirin, nitroglycerin, vitamin E, pentoxyphylline, acidanophyll, and arginine, you'll see that there has been no beneficial effect to suggest any of these because we lack sufficient data and RCTs. So, the British Fertility Society Policy and Practice Committee, Adjuvants in IVF, Evidence for Good Clinical Practice, suggested that clinical adjuncts in vitro fertilization, the list is growing. In vitro fertilization add-ons for the endometrium, but it doesn't necessarily add up. So, evidence based guidelines and recommendations regarding the use of vasodilators, uterine relaxants, aspirin, heparin, estrogens as adjuvants in IVF. Unfortunately, despite the lapse of 5 years since the last publication, there is still a lack of robust evidence for the most of the adjuvant search, and large, well designed, randomized controlled trials are still needed. Endometrial scratching, to scratch or not to scratch. Local injury of the endometrium induces an inflammatory response that promotes successful implantation because of increase of macrophage and dendritic cells. So things like tumor necrosis alpha, that TNF alpha, growth related oncogene A, interleukin 15, macrophage inflammatory protein IB, and osteopontin. Now, all these are increased. So, a positive correlation was found between the levels of macrophages, dendritic cells, the MIP1 beta expression, and the TNF alpha expression, and the pregnancy outcome. So, this is something that there has been a lot of interest in this, and it does hold promise. But if you look at all this data from the Cochrane, endometrial injury in women undergoing assisted reproductive techniques, or you have the others over here, the scratch, as well as if you look at here also, the endometrial scratching prior to IVF, does it help in women and for whom? So you also have one that is in 2019, as late as 2019, impact of local endometrial injury on the in vitro fertilization, intracytoplasmic sperm injection outcomes, a systematic review and analysis. So what does the above results show? The results of the above studies shows no benefit. Conflicting opinions among various authors has been noted. The cytokine orchestra. This is a very busy slide. We have a lot of these cytokine names over here, enough to understand that this is an orchestra, and an orchestra means that there are a lot of the people actually playing different instruments over here. So we have the pinopods that is coming in, there is an HCG secretion, there is a prostaglandin E2 also synthesis, the COX2 also, and you'll have the pluripotency stem cells. So all in all, you have a complex data here just to suggest that even our insulin, eosinophils, NK cells, are all increased. The T cells and the B cell lymphocytes are also increased, and the macrophages is decreased. So finally, if you want to be looking at all this, it means that there is a complex interplay of biomarkers, and therefore everything has to be very balanced. So here we look at the age of omics. And when we talk of omics, we're looking at transcriptomes, proteomes, metabolomes. So it is either the DNA or the RNA, the mRNA, or the protein metabolites. So transcriptomics, displaced window of implantation, disrupted window of implantation. So if you look at the ERA analysis of gene expression profile of 208 genes, altered gene expression pattern has been seen. If you look at this, I think we've already heard this from our previous speakers, so we don't have to go into this, but it just suggests that the classification and prediction from this gene expression can actually predict a personalized embryo transfer so that the window of implantation can be identified with each patient. Now, we also looked at the morphological markers of endometrial receptivity with the pinopods. These pinocytes take in fluid and solute to reduce uterine fluid volume by pinocytosis, facilitate intimate contact between the blastocyst and the uterine epithelium. The clinical validation of pinopod as a marker of endometrial receptivity in a randomized controlled trial suggests that pinopod scoring is a reliable marker of endometrial receptivity and is based on pinopod expression and serves as a promising tool. What about immunomodulation in RIF? So you look at this, that the uterine NK cells, natural killer cell biopsy, and the population of the uterine natural killer cell tightly regulated, and it is analyzed by the flow cytometry analysis of the NK cells in the endometrium. So what is important is it's performed in the luteal phase, no association between the PNK and the uterine peripheral blood NK and the uterine natural killer cell density. And what you're actually looking at is the CD56 and the CD16. So you looked at the intralipids, the steroids, these are the other adjuvants, then the PBMC and the um, ENF alpha, seminal plasma, as well as tacrolimus. Now, intralipids was doing the rounds. Intralipids will in about 80% of cases, successfully downregulate NK cells within 2 to 3 weeks. They bind to the PPR receptors on the NK cells. This effect lasts for 4 to 9 weeks when administered in early pregnancy. So the timing of administration here, initially on the day of ovarian stimulation, repeated once after positive pregnancy, but no uniform consensus on this of the total number of doses. Intravenous immunoglobulin, what is IVIG? Intravenous immunoglobulin is a solution of highly purified immunoglobulin G derived from large pools of human plasma that contain antibodies against a broad spectrum of bacterial and viral agents. So therefore, one has to look at why are you giving this? Is there an innate immunity or there is an adaptive immunity? So one has to look at what are we actually doing with this kind of immunity, basically to try and prevent any kind of rejection of the implanting embryo. So you have the TH1 and the TH2 as well. So you're looking at the good one and the bad one. So you need to be able to balance this and see that the expansions of these two will be able to help keep the embryo inside rather than to allow for the embryo to be aborted. What about the role of glucocorticoids here? It decreases endometrial inflammation and stabilizes the cytokine expression profile. So there is good evidence to recommend against the routine use of corticoids during the implantation window to improve the outcome of live birth in ART cycles in the general population. So again, they say that you have to do additional studies to determine if there is any subpopulations where the benefit may exist but are not proven. TNF alpha inhibitors are also there, so you'll need to look at all these, medications that we have here. And if you see these medications, you need to see whether they're still experimental. It increases the risk of serious infection and malignancy. So, therefore, there is insufficient evidence to recommend any of these TNF alpha inhibitors for treatment to improve IVF outcome. So, this is level 2 studies of low quality, that is grade C. So, we have to be very careful in trying to experiment. The role of immunotherapy in in vitro fertilization as a guideline, immunotherapies reviewed in the present document are either not associated with improved live birth or outcome in IVF, or have been insufficiently studied to make definitive conclusions regarding benefits and risks. In the absence of well-defined, designed, adequately powered RCTs, patients must be informed of uncertain benefits and risks associated with immunotherapy. So, finally, there is no evidence to suggest screening for these conditions in an asymptomatic population. What about the thrombogenic factors in RIF? The APLA antibodies bind to the trophoblast, causes defective syncytia formation, failure of primary invasion and placentation, antibody binding to endothelium causes failure of expression of cell adhesion molecules. So, thrombophilia in RIF and the role of heparin. It has a role in improving live birth rate in women with APLA syndrome, and routine testing for hereditary thrombophilia is not recommended. What about adjunct of low molecular weight heparin to improve live birth rate after recurrent implantation failure? A systematic review suggests that when you give pooled risk ratio in women over 3 RIF showed significant improvement in live birth rate and a reduction in the miscarriage rate when administered with heparin when compared to controls. The implantation rate showed non-significant trend towards improvement. The beneficial effect is not significant if pooled risks ratios from only recurrent implantation failure patients were considered. So the number needed to treat was 8. Therefore, you'll have to understand. So conclusion was that in women over with 3 recurrent implantation failures, low molecular weight heparin improves live birth rate by 78% compared with control. But the limitation was it is a small size and lack of adequate power. If you look at all these interventions that are there, you look at if it's a maternal cause, anatomical problem, thrombophilia, genetics, immunological problem, infections, and altered molecules and endometrial receptivity. And this will be the summary for etiology and treatment. What kind of intervention will you do for anatomical things like salpingectomy, fibroid removal, polypectomy, endometrial growth? The second one with thrombophilia will be low molecular weight heparin, and genetics will be the ERA, the PGS, the karyotyping. Immunological will be the IVIG, tacrolimus, PBMCs, and GCSF. Infections, antibiotics, and altered molecules and receptivity will be the endometrial scratch and the GCSF. The others would be the embryo factors, the male factors, and the IVF protocols to optimize the protocols. So the intervention here for embryo would be the PGS and PGD, the stop smoking and IMSI, and an IVF protocol is to optimize. So this is what we would look as personalized medicine. So time lapse in the category of gamete, endometrial, and embryological. The time lapse imaging, assisted hatching, embryo glue, sperm DNA testing, egg activation with calcium ionophore, physiological intracytoplasmic sperm injection, and of course intracytoplasmic morphological sperm injection, PGS, endometrial receptivity array, endometrial scratching, and reproductive immunology. So the HEFA traffic light scoring. If you look at all this thing, you have evidence of effective and safety. None of them score green. You have conflicting clinical evidence, which is the orange, and red says evidence of clinical effect ineffectiveness, so which means not to be considered. So you look at it, at the end of my talk, I still do not have one answer that will tell you take this point home and you will not have recurrent implantation failure. The conclusion here would be the diverse etiologies and understandings pose significant challenges in diagnosis and treatment. Role of multidisciplinary treatment is important. Occult cases, which is molecular and immunological, pose a greater challenge. Counseling the couple and giving them realistic explanations is of utmost importance. Third party reproduction to be considered accordingly.